the smile that hid a monster. The sound of a ceramic mug shattering against the hardwood floor is something I'll never forget. Some people remember the day their lives changed because of a phone call. Others remember a knock at the door. For me, it was the sound of coffee spilling across polished oak and the terrifying silence that followed. By the time I reached the living room, my wife, Helen, was lying motionless on the floor. A thin stream of blood ran from the side of her head, slowly spreading across the rug she had proudly picked out almost 20 years earlier. Standing only a few feet away was the man responsible, Arnold Benson. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't trying to help. He wasn't even pretending to care. Instead, he looked down at Helen with the coldest smile I'd ever seen. Then he looked directly into my eyes. She lost her balance, he said calmly. If anyone asks, that's what happened. Before I could answer, he stepped over the broken coffee mug, straightened his expensive jacket, and walked out of my house as if he had just finished discussing the weather. The front door closed. His truck disappeared down the street. Only then did I drop to my knees beside Helen. Helen, sweetheart, stay with me. My hands trembled as I pressed a kitchen towel against the wound on her head. Blood soaked through the fabric almost immediately. I dialed emergency services with fingers that barely obeyed me. The dispatcher kept talking. Sir, can you hear me? Is she breathing? Basher? Yes. Barely. Keep pressure on the wound. Those few minutes felt longer than the previous 64 years of my life. The ambulance arrived quickly. Paramedics rushed inside. One checked Helen's pulse while another prepared oxygen. They loaded her onto a stretcher and hurried toward the ambulance. I climbed into my pickup and followed behind, praying to God that I wouldn't lose the woman who had spent 41 years standing beside me, through every joy and every hardship life had thrown at us. As I drove toward Memorial Hospital, one question echoed inside my mind. How had it come to this? The answer wasn't simple. It had started years earlier, long before blood stained my living room floor, long before Arnold's smile became something I feared. It started the day my daughter introduced us to the man she insisted was the love of her life. Uppercut, Arnold arrived wearing a tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to him. His handshake was firm, too firm, the kind of handshake meant to establish dominance instead of friendship. I'm Arnold Benson, he said proudly. I own one of the fastest growing construction companies in Texas. For the next 2 hours, Arnold talked almost exclusively about himself. His business, his income, his investments, his expensive vacations, his luxury pickup. Every conversation somehow returned to one subject: Arnold. Whenever someone else tried speaking, he redirected the attention back to himself. At first, I assumed he was simply nervous. Helen wasn't convinced. That night, after Clementine and Arnold left, she quietly washed dishes while I dried them. Without looking at me, she whispered, "Did you notice how he never once asked about us?" I shrugged. Maybe he's just ambitious. She shook her head. No. There's something missing behind his smile. I laughed gently. I think you're worrying too much. Looking back now, I wish I had listened. The wedding took place 11 months later. It was beautiful. Our daughter looked happier than I'd ever seen her. Arnold stood proudly beside her, smiling for every photograph. Everyone congratulated them. Everyone believed they had a bright future ahead. Everyone, except Helen. During the reception, she squeezed my hand. I hope I'm wrong. So do I replied. Neither of us realized that those would become some of the saddest words we'd ever speak. The changes happened slowly, almost invisibly. At first, family dinners became less frequent. then birthdays, then holidays. Whenever we invited Clementine over, Arnold always seemed to have another plan. A business meeting, a weekend trip, an important client. Eventually, our daughter stopped calling every week, then every month. When she did answer the phone, her voice sounded different, quieter, more careful, as though someone was listening nearby. Helen noticed immediately. She's changing. I tried convincing myself it was simply marriage. People get busy, life changes, families grow. But deep inside, I knew Helen was right. One Sunday afternoon, Helen baked Clementine's favorite chocolate cookies. She packed them into a small tin and asked if we could surprise them. When we arrived, Clementine hugged us tightly. Arnold barely looked up from his phone. Helen smiled warmly. I made your favorite. Arnold opened the container, took one look, closed it. We're trying to eat healthier. His tone wasn't rude. It was worse. It was dismissive. Helen apologized immediately. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You never ask, Arnold replied. The room fell silent. On the drive home, Helen stared out the window. I was only trying to do something nice. I reached across the seat and held her hand. I know. But somehow, that wasn't enough. Every visit became another opportunity for Arnold to criticize someone. Helen folded laundry incorrectly. She bought the wrong groceries. She arrived too early. She stayed too late. Nothing she did was ever acceptable. And somehow, she always apologized. One evening, I finally asked why. Helen, why do you keep saying sorry? She smiled sadly. Because if I don't, he'll take it out on Clementine. That answer broke something inside me. Arnold crosses a line that changes everything forever when a family gathering turns into a nightmare. And Merle quietly begins preparing a plan that will eventually destroy the empire Arnold spent years building. For a while, I convinced myself that Arnold's behavior was nothing more than arrogance. Plenty of successful people developed oversized egos. It didn't necessarily make them dangerous. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first real warning came on a rainy Thursday evening. Helen had invited Clementine and Arnold over for dinner. She spent the entire afternoon preparing their favorite meals: roast chicken, homemade mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and the peach cobbler our daughter had loved since childhood. By the time they arrived, the table looked like something from a holiday celebration. Helen smiled proudly. I hope you're hungry. Clementine smiled back. It smells amazing, Mom. Arnold barely glanced at the table. As soon as he sat down, he frowned. You still use this old china? Helen looked confused. Yes, we've had it for years. He picked up a plate and examined it like a judge inspecting evidence. My grandmother had dishes like these. They belonged in a museum. He laughed. No one else did. Helen quietly reached for the serving spoon, pretending not to hear him. Throughout dinner, Arnold criticized everything. The chicken was too dry. The potatoes had too much butter. The bread wasn't warm enough. Even the coffee was cheap. Helen apologized after every complaint. I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. Those words became so common that they sounded automatic. When dessert was served, Clementine accidentally spilled a little juice on the tablecloth. Before Helen could grab a towel, Arnold slammed his hand against the table. The loud bang startled everyone. What is wrong with you? He snapped at Clementine. Can you do anything without making a mess? The room froze. Clementine's smile disappeared instantly. She lowered her head like a frightened child. It's okay, Helen said softly, reaching for the napkins. I'll clean it. Arnold pointed toward Helen. This is exactly why she never learns. You fix every mistake she makes. I slowly placed my fork on the table. That's enough. Arnold looked at me for the first time that evening. Excuse me? You heard me. This is our home. You don't raise your voice at my daughter. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Arnold smiled, not because he was amused, because he enjoyed confrontation. He leaned back in his chair. I think we're leaving. Without another word, he stood. Clementine immediately followed him. Before walking out, she whispered to Helen, "I'm sorry." Helen hugged her tightly. "You never have to apologize to me." The front door closed. Silence filled the house. Helen slowly gathered the untouched dessert plates. I noticed her hands shaking. "I ruined dinner," she whispered. I walked over and gently held her shoulders. "No. You didn't ruin anything." "He did." She looked at me with watery eyes. "I just want our family back." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Over the next several months, Arnold became even more controlling. He decided where Clementine could go, who she could talk to, how often she could visit us. Even simple phone calls became difficult. Whenever Helen called, Arnold usually answered, "Clementine's busy. We'll call later." Later almost never came. One afternoon, Helen sat on our porch holding her phone. She'd called 3 times. No answer. She sighed. "I miss my little girl." I wrapped my arm around her. So do I. Neither of us knew that Clementine wanted to call. Arnold simply wouldn't allow it. A few weeks later, we attended Maya's 7th birthday party. It should have been one of the happiest days of the year. Instead, it became another painful reminder of what our family had become. Helen spent hours wrapping gifts. She even knitted Maya a small pink sweater by hand. Walter watched as Emily lowered her eyes, unable to look at him. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument they had ever shared. A year ago, she would have expected him to give in after seeing her cry. This time, she could tell that something inside her father had changed forever. The buyer patiently waited a few steps away, holding the contract in his hands. He wasn't in a hurry. Years of buying and selling properties had taught him that the most important decisions were never rushed. Emily finally spoke. "Dad, if you sell this house, we'll lose every memory we've ever had here." Walter looked around the front yard. The old oak tree still stood proudly beside the porch. The swing he had built for Emily decades earlier swayed gently in the breeze. He smiled sadly. The memories don't disappear because a house changes owners. They're carried by the people who lived them. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I know I hurt you." "You did. I never meant to." "I believe that." She stepped closer. "Then please, don't do this." Walter took a slow breath before answering. "This decision isn't about revenge. If I wanted revenge, I would have made sure you felt the same humiliation I felt yesterday. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" It's about finally respecting myself. Those words hit harder than anything else he had said. Emily remembered every birthday her father had organized, every school event he had attended, every late-night drive when she called because her car had broken down, every bill he quietly paid without expecting anything in return. She had always seen those things as normal. Only now did she realize they had been gifts, not obligations. Her husband finally walked forward. "Mr. Bennett, I owe you an apology, too." Walter looked at him. "I should have spoken up yesterday. When Emily said there wasn't room, I knew it was wrong. I stayed quiet because I wanted to avoid an argument." Walter nodded. Sometimes silence hurts as much as the words themselves. The younger man lowered his head. "You're right." For the first time since arriving, the grandchildren stepped out of the vehicles. The youngest, Lily, ran toward Walter. "Grandpa!" Walter knelt and wrapped his arms around her. She looked up with innocent eyes. "Mommy's crying." "I know. Is everything okay?" Walter smiled gently. "It will be." Children had a way of reminding adults what truly mattered. He kissed her forehead before helping her back to her parents. The buyer cleared his throat politely. "Mr. Bennett, whenever you're ready." Walter turned toward him. "I'm ready." Emily shook her head. "Dad." He held up his hand. "I've spent years giving everyone exactly what they needed. Today, I'm making one decision for myself." He picked up the pen, without hesitation. He signed. The buyer smiled warmly and extended his hand. "Congratulations." Walter shook it firmly. "It's time." Emily quietly wiped away her tears. She realized the sale wasn't really about losing a house. It was about losing the certainty that her father would always rescue her, no matter what she did. 3 weeks later, the paperwork was complete. Walter moved into the smaller home he had quietly purchased the previous year as part of his retirement plans. It wasn't grand. It didn't have a huge backyard or 4 bedrooms. But it was peaceful. Every window overlooked a small garden filled with flowers Margaret had once loved. For the first time in years, Walter arranged the furniture exactly the way he wanted. He hung only a handful of family photographs instead of covering every wall. The house felt lighter. So did he. Across town, Emily and her husband rented a modest apartment. Money suddenly became something they had to think about. They created budgets, cooked at home, canceled unnecessary subscriptions. The children shared a bedroom for a while. Life wasn't as comfortable as before. But something unexpected happened. Instead of pulling them apart, the struggle brought them closer together. Emily found herself appreciating things she had once ignored. When the sink leaked, she fixed it herself instead of calling her father. When the car needed servicing, she and her husband saved for it together. Every small achievement gave her confidence she had never experienced before. One quiet evening, she visited Walter alone. She carried a small envelope. "I wrote something." Walter opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Page after page described every moment she regretted, not only leaving him behind that morning, but years of assuming he would always solve her problems. One sentence made Walter stop reading. "I confused your love with unlimited responsibility. I thought being your daughter meant you would always carry my burdens. I forgot that you were growing older while I kept acting like a child." Walter looked up. "Did you write all of this yourself?" Emily nodded. Every word. He folded the letter carefully. "This means more to me than you know." She smiled through her tears. "I've also accepted a better job." "Congratulations." "I wanted to prove something." "What?" "That my children should admire me the same way I admired you." Walter couldn't help smiling. They already will. Months passed. Their relationship slowly became healthier. Emily still visited often, but she always called first. She never expected financial help. When she needed advice, she asked. Sometimes Walter said yes. Sometimes he said no. For the first time, she respected both answers equally. Nearly a year later, Emily invited Walter to dinner. This time there were no expensive restaurants or luxurious vacations. Just homemade food in a small apartment filled with laughter. Lily opened the door before anyone else. "Grandpa," she hugged him tightly, "we made your favorite dinner." Walter laughed. Then I came to the right place. During dinner, everyone talked about ordinary things: school, work, weekend plans. Nobody mentioned the old house. Nobody mentioned money. For Walter, that silence spoke louder than any apology. After dessert, Emily disappeared into the bedroom before returning with a small wooden box. "I found something while we were packing." Walter opened it slowly. Inside rested an old photograph. Margaret stood in the front yard, holding a young Emily in her arms. The edges of the picture had faded with time, but the smiles remained as bright as ever. Walter stared at it for a long moment. "I thought this was lost. I kept it safe." He gently ran his fingers across the photograph. Margaret had always believed family wasn't measured by possessions. It was measured by how people treated one another. Emily quietly broke the silence. "You know, when you sold the house, I thought you were trying to punish me." Walter looked at her. "And now?" She smiled softly. "Now I understand you weren't closing the door on me." He waited. "You were teaching me how to stand on my own." Walter nodded. "I never stopped loving you." "I know. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices." Emily reached across the table and held his hand. "Thank you for loving me enough to do that." Walter's eyes became moist. He squeezed her hand gently. Every parent reaches a moment when they must decide whether to keep carrying their children or teach them to walk alone. She smiled, and I finally learned how to walk. As Walter drove home that evening, the city lights reflected across his windshield. He no longer missed the old house, because he realized the house had never been the foundation of his family. Respect was. Love was. Honesty was. The building had only been bricks and wood. The real home existed wherever people chose to value one another. Walter parked outside his small house and looked up at the stars. For the first time in many years, he felt completely at peace. He had not lost a daughter. He had helped her become the woman she was always capable of becoming. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give isn't another chance, another payment, or another sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping back, allowing your children to face life on their own, and trusting that everything you taught them will finally take root. Walter smiled as he walked inside. He quietly turned off the porch light, closed the door, and began the happiest chapter of his life.